welcome to Time for Health. I'm your host, Rachel Fall, and we're super glad you're with us today. Every time we meet, we talk about a different health topic that we hope is useful for you or people that you know and love. Today, I have as our guest Laura Miller from Firelands Counseling. Thank you for being here. You've done a show way in the past, but thanks for coming back. Today, we're talking about mental health and suicide, which is a bit of a heavy topic, but it is super important, and I feel like probably doesn't get talked about enough. So thanks for coming and kind of helping us through this. Why is it important to talk about this topic?
First, thank you for having me, because mental health issues are about wellness. You know, when people think about wellness, they often think of their family doctor and that type of thing, but mental health is wellness too. And to talk about suicide prevention is important. And I do appreciate it is something that's difficult to talk about for a lot of people. It's certainly a kind of a sad topic and can be triggering for people if they have any of their own history of mental health challenges, or if you know somebody who's attempted or completed suicide. So I appreciate, talking about it. Mental health issues are common. 1 in 5 people in the United States have a diagnosable mental health illness. And so we do want to talk about it because there's also potential opportunities to prevent suicide. Yeah. So that's something that, we want to do.
Okay. So what is it important to know about this topic?
So there's a couple things I want to highlight with suicide prevention, and there's a couple myths that people aren't aware of. And so one of the first ones is people often feel kind of intimidated about the topic, and they feel that only a professional, somebody who's a counselor, social worker, could make an intervention or know what to do about suicide prevention. And the truth is it's something that really anybody could do. So I think about like CPR or first aid. So many people, were trained in CPR first aid, and I have been for most of my adult life, but I've never actually, knock on wood, I've never needed to use that, out in the public. Yeah. But I think that to encounter somebody who's having a mental health crisis, you're more likely to do that. And so if people know some tips on suicide prevention, they might be able to make, a difference or an impact.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be just the professionals who are, all right. Anything else you?
And then another myth that I wanted to mention is that lots of times people are afraid to talk to somebody about suicide because it might give them the idea. I've talked to family members who say, I'm really worried about my family member and I'm worried they could be suicidal, but I didn't ask them about it because I didn't want to make them suicidal. And the reality is that if somebody's feeling depressed or having thoughts of suicide, to be able to talk about it actually reduces their fears and anxieties and opens up the discussion to get help.
Okay.
And there really is a lot of resources out there and help out there. So if you can get that discussion started, then you're more likely to get them to the help that they need.
It's probably like a lot of difficult discussions in life. You're, a little uncertain about starting that discussion, but really it's just what is needed to open up the door to resources and to communication and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as we're interacting with people, how do we determine if somebody is having, kind of a, I'm not going to use the right words, but like a low-grade depression issue or something a little bit more serious? What's the difference, or how can we tell?
So that is kind of tricky. It can be difficult to tell because I think we all know what stress looks like, or if someone's depressed, they might be lethargic or down, certainly if they're tearful. But the difference would be if somebody is depressed and they've been feeling that way for a couple weeks, and how is it impacting their life? Is it making it difficult for them to do their normal daily activities? Whether it could be school or work or obligations at home. So it's to that point, it's impacting their life. That's significant, and somebody would want to reach out for help. Okay. But certainly if somebody is having thoughts of suicide, that is not typical. And again, as a mental health professional, I've talked to people who have said, well, having suicidal thoughts is, normal. Like, well, no, that is actually a sign that it's a good idea to reach out for help, because we don't want somebody to be experiencing that acuity of symptoms. That's difficult.
Okay. So the length of time, how it's impacting their daily lives, that kind of stuff is how we know somebody might need to reach out for help. Or
right. So the severity, you know, the acuity of the symptoms, how long they've been going on. And again, if there's any thoughts of suicide, then that would be a right away, definitely need to get help.
Okay. So for the layperson, you know, as we're interacting with people and we sense maybe something might be up, what are some tips, things to say or not to say, or other things to look out for?
So one of the first things in talking about depression or suicide is to, again, we're watching for signs that they might be having depression, you know, sadness, or if you think they might be suicidal. So if you think somebody might be suicidal, it would be obvious if they were saying, yes, I'm having thoughts of death, or I'm having thoughts that I would want to die. But it's not always that obvious. Right. Sometimes it's more subtle. So if you heard somebody saying, you know, life's not worth living, you know, I just don't know if I can go on anymore, I can't handle this, I might not be around much longer. Mm-hmm. You know, more subtle types of things like that, or I wish I could just disappear, you know, I can't handle this. Those might be vague indicators that they're having thoughts of suicide. So it could be helpful to talk to them about that. Most of the time, if you talk to somebody and you're showing that you care and you're concerned, and you know, I'm really worried about you, you seem to be having a tough time, and then being patient and just listening. Lots of times what we're doing is we're lending our hope to somebody who's feeling kind of hopeless. You know, and so then asking them if they're having thoughts of suicide, asking them how they're doing. And remember, it's not going to give them the idea or suggestion or make it worse. You know, It just opens up that topic.
That conversation.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate what you said about, and listen, because I think a lot of times, I guess maybe I'll just speak for myself, but when we talk to somebody and we're, you know, trying to get something out of them or see how they're doing, I tend to want to fill that air with talking. And so if they're not talking, then I'm just talking rather than listening and letting that person process and talk on their own instead of just filling it with my talk.
Right, and I think a lot of people are afraid to ask the question because, well, what if they say yes? Well, that's really scary. Yep. You know, what if they say yes, then what do I do? Right. And kind of remembering, like with CPR, you know, if you're helping somebody doing CPR or first aid, you're just that initial help then to get them to the professional help. You don't have to take on all that responsibility, that there really is professional mental health help and crisis help out there.
Okay. So listening, asking them if they want to talk, and like you said, lending your hope to them because they may have run out for a little while.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about talking about suicide with someone or anything like that?
So when you do ask about suicide, it's best just to use those words. You know, are you having thoughts of ending your life? Are you thinking of suicide? To be direct, because it's such an important question. You want to be able to get a yes/no answer and to know how they're doing. And then just be in a space that's comfortable, you know, quiet, you know, not a lot of extra people around, you know, and to be supportive and that you do want to help, that's a goal in talking with them.
When you're sort of lending people your hope, I feel like I might have a tendency to, you know, well, don't feel that way. You have this to look forward to and that to look forward to. And I'm kind of guessing that that's probably not the right way to respond or lend my hope to somebody, is to, because they might feel like I'm dismissing their feelings.
Right. And that is kind of tricky because, you know, as the person who's not feeling depressed, you do see potential and hope. And so kind of lending that, but yeah, being careful not to dismiss and say, oh, well, you're wrong, you shouldn't feel that way. Because to that person, it really is important and that's how they feel. So yeah, we don't want to invalidate their feelings.
Okay. So if having these conversations with somebody and they do say, you know, I really don't feel like I want to be here anymore. Like, what are the resources, or what could somebody do next? Because again, we're just the intermediary before help arrives. So
right, you're the link to get to help. A couple resources would be, for Ottawa County, we're part of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Seneca, Ottawa, Sandusky, and Wyandotte counties. And so I would even recommend going to that website. They have a list of resources there. And there are local, counselors, social workers, and sometimes people also like to, talk to their, clergy or, for help as well. But, for crisis, there's also the Firelands 24-hour crisis hotline for mental health chemical dependency problems. And I will give you that number. It's 1-800-826-1306. And they will talk to the person, offer support and kind of triage the situation to see, what type of help do we need today? Right now, what do we need? There's also another number, just this past July, started the National Suicide number, 988. And so it's really easy to remember, 988. And typically 988 does transfer to our local number then, but it's just easy to remember, 988.
So that is a quick resource if you want to kind of link somebody to a professional, somebody to triage and kind of do an assessment of what to do next.
Absolutely. And something I recommend too is it's good to have these numbers in your phone because, if you write it down, it's easy to lose, but we always have our phones with us. So I encourage everybody, and I know I'm the mental health person, so I think about this all the time, but I encourage people to put the number in their phone because you never know when someone may need it. Whether you need it for yourself or whether you end up that you're with a friend or family member in the community and you're like, what was that number again?
Or you encounter somebody in at the mall, or you know what I mean? You never know. So
absolutely. So
we've got all kinds of numbers in there. We can add that one to it as well.
Yeah, have the number handy.
Okay. Now, just one last thing. There are some trainings that I know you guys do and maybe other agencies do as well, but I think those are important resources out there. As of the date that we're recording this, you have one coming up in February, but you kind of do them in different locations throughout the year. But talk about the QPR and the mental health first aid. Talk about those real quick.
Sure. QPR is a suicide prevention class. It's kind of a short one. It's only about hour and a half long. And that's where you can learn how to question somebody, that's the Q, about suicide, myths and facts about suicide, warning signs. So we just spoke about it briefly today, but that's where you get a lot more information on that and how to talk to somebody and ask that suicide question and how to get them to the resources they need. So that's QPR. If somebody's interested in that, there's at no cost to attend that. And then Mental Health First Aid is a program that we do have coming up in February 16th. And that is a 7.5-hour class. And for that, we learn in much more detail about how to recognize mental health crisis, substance use crisis, and what to do in those scenarios. And there's a 5-step action plan and how to respond to that. And again, about the resources.
Very cool.
So lots of options.
There are options out there. There are lots of resources. And any last minute thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I just appreciate you talking about it. And again, I know sometimes people are worried about talking about mental health because there's stigma. I do think the stigma is getting better, but it's still out there. And people need to know taking care of your mental health is just as important as going to the doctor or the dentist or taking care of your wellness in general, that it's an important thing.
It is an important topic. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right. So lots of resources and some tips for the lay person, just in case you know somebody again, or if you're going through something or have a family member or friend. This is great information, great resources, like always, every time we have somebody here. So use the information for yourself, share it with people. And until we meet again, I encourage you to make time for health.